definition of perfection.
I think everyone pretty much knows, other than our panelists, know the form basically, 7-8 minutes presentation from everyone and then open to questions. Hopefully, since today we believe is quiet, we will have time to stay till the end and then we can get some time for questions. Right, we are going to go in the order in which everybody is sitting in the order in your packs. So if we could.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to go through this quite quickly, both at the same time and also because what I've got to say is all written up for you. What I'm going to do is give you some idea of what the commercial opinion polls are saying, A, about what is the state of the referendum race, and B, what seems to be responsible for such movements of opinion as have occurred to date. This is all essentially an excuse to make sure you're aware, if you're not aware already, that as part of the ESRC Future Scotland in the UK initiative, I'm running a website called whatscotlandthinks.org with the hashtag as indicated there. And you should find there pretty much anything that certainly the commercial polls have surveyed and quite a lot of the academic survey research over the last 3 or 4 years as well. Okay, the presentation is in two halves. The first is, so where are we? To which the answer is going to be, we're not quite sure. And then secondly, what seems to be capable of shifting votes, where it seems to be pretty clear what the answer is. Okay, this is to give you an idea both of our recent excitement north of the border and also some of the things you can do from the What's Happening Things website. This is literally downloaded from the site, so if you you've got to give a presentation about public opinion in Scotland. You can take all of our graphics, you can download them, shove it into a PowerPoint, and share it so you know what you're talking about. Recent excitement number one was an opinion poll that was published by the Daily Record last Thursday for Survation. And in this and in most of what I'm going to do, I've taken the don't knows out. So you're actually looking at what the opinion polls point to in terms of actual referendum outcome. And what you're meant to note is that the gap between no, which is the orange line, and yes, which is the blue line, was narrower in the most recent poll than any previous Survation poll. Excitement number two came from Panel Base over the weekend, which was commissioned by Yes Scotland themselves. And again, you're meant to notice the same point, that gradually the crocodile's teeth are coming closer together, and somebody is going to get eaten, but we're not quite sure who. That said, however, there was one other poll over the weekend that was done by ICM for Scotland on Sunday. Now that, as compared with its previous poll, again showed a narrowing of the no lead, but as you can also see, this was not a record position. In fact, the 45% vote this poll pointed towards, once you take out the don't knows, was actually in line with the average. So two polls pointing to a record, that kind of generates excitement. One poll, however, saying, well, yes, maybe things have narrowed again, but actually this poll's been bouncing up and down a bit more recently. Clearly, individual polls are potentially subject to sampling error, so we therefore resort to safety in numbers by trying to construct a poll of polls, and what Scotland thinks now is running a regular poll of polls, which is simply the arithmetic average of the last 6 polls. Top right-hand side shows you the current average of the last 6 polls, with the don't knows excluded, 44% for yes, 56% for no, and underneath we are tracking for you over time how this moving average has moved. Just to show it to you in something slightly bigger, you can see how it has been moving up and down more recently. We've got quite narrow towards the back end of middle of April, moved back out again, it's now come back in again. But if you kind of take the slightly longer view, this is where we were before Christmas. And whatever the minor variations now, we're clearly in a rather different scene. And indeed, if you then kind of move away from moving averages and actually just look at what was the average of the opinion polls across 6 discrete time periods, those of us who were following this story last year were going, oh my God, we're going to have another 9 months of absolutely no change. This is going to be crushingly boring. Then the Scottish Government published its white paper. That began to shift the polls after Christmas. Along came George Osborne with his day trip to Edinburgh. That helped to shift it a bit further, but not the direction he intended. And as you can see, if anything, the polls have narrowed a bit further, but not at the speed that they were doing in the winter. And until the excitement of the last 2 weeks, I think the yes side had to be concerned to some degree that rather than having momentum, we were back to a position of stability. Whether we are back to momentum, we'll have to wait and see. As ever, we need another opinion poll to prove whether that's the case or not. That said, however, so far I've kind of gloriously shown the averages and ignored all the differences. There is a crucial uncertainty about where we are in this referendum race. This uncertainty has been with us all the way since the polling started in the beginning of last year, and that is that there are systematic differences between the polling companies in their estimates of the yes and no vote. So one of the reasons for the excitement of the recent days is that the 3 polling companies that consistently produce a high level of yes support were the 3 companies that polled most recently and published most recently. Ergo, media impression that this is a desperately close race. Go back a week, I know you had something from TNS PMRB, you had something from Henderson, and it kind of was saying, oh, it's still kind of a long way off. I hate to tell you, but we don't know who's right and who's wrong. There isn't any clear one-to-one relationship between the methodology being used and the results being obtained. These 3 are indeed all internet-based surveys. ICM, for this on this occasion exceptionally, are using internet polling rather than phone polling. But YouGov, of course, are also doing internet polling and are coming up with much more conservative estimates for the yes. And there are lots of other differences between the polls, but again, they don't map neatly into a one-to-one relationship between the method and what we find in terms of the result. Okay, and you know maybe somebody's ignored the don't knows. What about the don't knows? Well, point number 1 is actually, in most opinion polls, only about 15% of people say they don't know. In my view, this is not particularly high. Here's a couple of examples of polls on the alternative vote for the House of Commons. 6 to 8 weeks out from polling day, much higher levels of don't knows. This is a subject that Scotland's been arguing about for 40 years. But there is an exception. TNS PMRB get much higher levels of don't knows. Why? Because the truth is it depends on how you ask the question. And because it depends on how you ask the question, therefore it doesn't make sense to think of people as either decided or undecided. The truth is people lie along the spectrum, and they lie along the spectrum whereby around half of people say, don't care what Alexander said, don't care what Alistair Darling said, don't care what anybody says, I've made my mind up, I'm going to vote yes or no. And then people kind of move to, well, I think I've got almost decided, but maybe I might change my mind, or I've got an idea, but it's not quite the final decision. But then again, even TNSPRB only find that 15% of people really are, I have no idea what I'm going to do. So the truth is that the poll numbers are going to move, but it isn't simply a case of converting the undecided. This is probably the crucial group. But these people will have to be persuaded to change at least a provisional decision, not simply being recruited into one side or the other. What's this all about? Well, essentially what I'm going to show you is that the commercial polling data basically tells the same story as the academic survey data, and for those of you interested in that, the British Society's report is out this morning, and there is a chapter in there on why people are for or against independence, and you will get exactly the same message from that data as I'm going to show you from the commercial data. Exhibit number 1, of course, this is partly about identity. If you feel strongly Scottish, you don't feel strongly British, you're much more likely to vote yes. That said, however, feeling strongly Scottish and denying your British is evidently not a sufficient condition to persuade people that they should vote yes. There are still 1/3 of this group in Maury's most recent survey who are not necessarily yes supporters. But the truth is, the explicit campaign is not primarily about identity, partly because the yes side don't want to touch it, but also because in truth most people in Scotland have a dual sense of identity. Which way do I vote on the basis of identity? I don't know. I feel both. Which at least is in part of the reason why so much of the campaign is about the instrumental consequences rather than about identity. But the other reason why it's not about identity is that identity doesn't really change much over time. This is what Maury and found. The Scottish Society has a much longer time period to show exactly the same thing. What you might hope to change are people's views about what the consequences of independence would be. And ICM are regularly tracking the 2 principal instrumental arguments in the Scottish Government White Paper. One is independence will enable Scotland to create a more equal society, and 2, it will enable Scotland to have a more prosperous economy. On the question of equality, the yes side has made progress. This is the proportion of people who think that there will be less inequality in an independent Scotland, and as you can see, those numbers are somewhat improved, and more and more people think there will be less inequality than more. But when it comes to the economy, pessimists still outnumber optimists. Although that said, notice how the lead of the pessimists over the optimists has narrowed in more recent months. Which of these matters? It's the economy, stupid. 88% of those people who say that ICM's poll on Sunday, it's true in all their polls, 88% of people who say that independence is good for Scotland's economy, say they're going to vote yes. Only 1% of those who think it's going to be worse. Only 63% of those people who think there will be less inequality in an independent Scotland say they're going to vote yes. It clearly is much less important as a driver, and we can now also see this by tracking these figures over time. This is the no lead over yes, bouncing up to some degree in ICM's polls. This is the net optimism about inequality. Notice it just basically sails off serenely into the sun and then kind of trails off a bit here, but there's no obvious relationship with this, which is the no lead over yes. This, in contrast, the views about the economy. Notice, no lead goes down, pessimism declines. No lead goes up, pessimism increases. And then again, more recently. In other words, these two things attract each other beautifully. So not only do we now know that the cross-sectional relationship between attitudes towards the economy and the yes vote is what's crucial, we can now also see that movements up and down in the no lead over yes is also tracked with reference to attitudes towards the economy. And that's what I've just said all of this. Oh, sorry, I was just thinking about that.
Right, thank you very much. We're going to be talking about the impact of devolution preferences on voting intention at the referendum using data from the British election study. Some of you may be familiar with the British election study. For those who are not, it's one of the longest running national election studies in the world. It's been running since 1964, after every single election. And for the 2015 election, it's being run from the Universities of Manchester, Oxford and Nottingham. And as part of that study, we're conducting a 20,000 person panel of voters across Great Britain, including over 4,000 in Scotland. And it's those 4,000 plus respondents that I'll be reporting on today. So, thinking to yesterday's joint statement by the unionist, the main unionist party leaders concerning the commitment to greater devolution, this seems to be a significant electoral move given the state of opinion on devolution in Scotland. The charts here report on questions to be asked about which body voters felt should make the most important decisions in 6 key policy areas. In every key policy area, apart from defence, the majority of people wanted the most important decisions to be made by the Scottish Parliament. However, although that position is a popular position, it's not a sufficient condition to ensure a pro-independence vote. So even amongst the people who think that the Scottish Parliament should make the most important decisions in the key areas, particularly welfare and taxes, a significant majority, at least a quarter, even though they want the Scottish Parliament to make the most important decisions, say they will vote no in September. So we asked 2 further key questions about devolution, and they are in the briefing paper, so I won't read them out in detail. But essentially, we asked about whether there should be more devolution, that is what people want, but also whether they think devolution would happen anyway, even if Scotland votes no. What we find is that a large majority want some or more powers to be given to the Scottish Parliament. That's nearly 3/4 of all Scottish electors are saying they would want some or more powers. So that's what they want. What they think they'll get if there's a no vote is interesting. A significant proportion, overall half of all Scottish electors think that Scotland will get more powers even if it votes no. So this perhaps explains the move by the Unionist parties yesterday to confirm this commitment to the devolution, to shore up this proportion who think devolution can happen within the Union. So, if we look at these two questions together, we can imagine there's 4 possible places where people might be. People who think that devolution will happen anyway, but don't want it. People who think it will happen anyway, but do want it, and so forth. So there's 4 possible positions. For those on the left of this diagram, those not wanting more devolution, you might expect them to vote no, regardless of what they expect to happen. In the top right, these are people you'd expect to be voting for independence. They want devolution, but they're not expecting to get it within the Union. It's the bottom right that are going to be the key, because these are people that do want devolution, but perhaps they think it can be delivered within the Union. So what's the size of these different groups? Well, interestingly, that bottom right group make up the largest proportion of the Scottish electorate. So there's a significant proportion who are in this position where they want more devolution, but they think it can happen within the Union. So how will these different groups vote? This is their reported voting intention for September, and this is based on the fieldwork from the first wave of the British election study, which was carried out at the end of February, beginning of March, so well before these announcements were made. What you see is there's a large majority in the top right who want devolution but don't expect it, are going to vote for independence. Yet those who think they will get devolution, even if they vote no, only just over 1/3 will vote for independence. So this is why it's so crucial to persuade the Scottish electorate that devolution can happen within the Union. Now, how is this going to affect voting in September? Well, if we look at the state of the 2 camps as it was when the British election study was conducted, we found similar proportions to what John was showing for the same period. Just under 40% saying they vote yes, and just over half will vote no, with the remainder saying that they do not yet know. Then we broke that down according to whether people felt that their preferences for devolution would be met within the Union. So, those that are labelled expectations are met is everybody who think they will get at least as many powers as they want in the Scottish Parliament, as they're expecting to get within the Union. Those on the right, those who want more devolution than they think they'll get. And as you can see, those voters who think their expectations will be met, very strong majority in favour of independence. Very strong majority will vote no if they think their expectations will be met. By contrast, nearly 2/3 of those with unmet expectations are going to vote yes. So potentially this has a big impact on the outcome in September. Just to see how important this is compared to other factors, we ran a model of voting intention in September. So this basically holds all these different factors together. It looks at the effect of all these factors simultaneously. or works out which are have the biggest impact on yes voting. As John also suggested, the most important factors are actually the economy. So whether people think that the economy will be better under independence, and whether their own personal economic situation will be better under independence. But this meeting of expectations, this idea that voters' devolution preferences won't be met is a significant influence on the yes vote in September. This equates to something like 3.5 times, 3.5 times more likely, having taken everything else into account, if you think that your expectations won't be met within the Union. So this is a significant factor. It's not the most important factor, which is the economy, but it is still an important factor. And not only that, but it's one that the parties in the campaign have some ability to manipulate, as is suggested by yesterday's announcement. I will finish just by saying, although that does spell a little bit of trouble for the yes campaign, a little bit of good news is the profile of the people who say they're very likely to vote but haven't yet decided which way. That makes up about 8% of the British election committee sample. Those 8% are much less likely than the overall sample to expect devolution preferences to be met inside the Union. So there is some hope there that the people who have not yet decided which way to vote may still come out in favour of independence if they can't be persuaded that further devolution will happen. Okay, that's all from me. I will skip these to Ailsa's slides.
Thank you. Now, Ailsa. Ailsa's from University of Edinburgh and the Risk and Constitutional Attitude Survey.
Thanks very much. Just an explanation of how the survey fits within the larger Future UK Scotland programme. We're the behavioural section of the Scottish Centre on Constitutional Change. So we're looking at existing referendum studies, looking at referendums in Quebec and Australia and New Zealand to see if there's anything we can drag out of those. And then we're also funding new data collection. We've done a survey of business leaders. We have this general population survey, which is a pre-referendum and post-referendum panel survey. And we're running lab experiments as well. And it's very much a collaboration between political scientists on the one hand and behavioural economists on the other. We're interested in risk. We're interested in economic risk, but not exclusively economic risk. So we're interested in what people perceive to be political risk and cultural risk. We're interested in where people perceive the risks to lie in terms of an independent Scotland or a Scotland that remains within the UK. We're interested in general risk aversion and whether people think primarily of what's going on in the present but going on in the future. In terms of the survey that I'll be talking about today, it's been administered by ICM. It went into the field on the 13th of June. We're still in the field. We've got 12,200 respondents, so these are preliminary data. And in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, I'll talk a little bit about constitutional preferences, but I don't want to go over what John has already said, because much of what that section says is quite consistent with what's already on the West Scotland website. I want to talk a little bit, though, about attitudes to the referendum process, levels of political knowledge, expectations, and where people think risk lies with respect to a yes and a no vote. And then, are people doing anything to mitigate against the risks? And here we're talking about risks associated with independence. We've got experiments in the survey as well, but we'll be analysing those in the coming weeks. So, likelihood of voting intention. The headline figures how likely is it that I will vote. Fairly consistent. We asked people what they thought the turnout would be in the referendum, and the average answer was about 71%. When we asked voting intention in a number of different ways, when we used the exact question, when we proposed the exact question, got 35% saying they vote yes, 48% saying no. But if we strip out the don't knows and the did not answers, we got 42% for yes, 57% for 58% for no's. In terms of of how certain people are to vote, if we look just at the people who have made up their mind, are they likely to change their mind? But if you look at the people who are absolutely not going to change their mind, and the people say, you know, it's actually very unlikely I will change my mind, we're talking about 90% of voters. So the room to maneuver for the campaigns is shrinking on what we've seen before. So I'll focus on what is new with this survey. We asked people about the referendum process. We know that asking about the referendum process is important because we know it structures, if nothing else, how losers react after the referendum. So if you back the losing option, it really does matter if you thought the process was fair. If you thought the process was unfair, it takes much longer to regenerate positive attitudes towards the political system. And the key message here is that people do appear to believe that the independence debate is giving them an important opportunity for engagement. When we ask about low levels of efficacy, do you think it's just so complicated you can't possibly make much sense of it? Less than 30% say yes, that asterisk is actually supposed to be in the bottom row, not here. When we asked about the change in franchise, people had positive views about that. Again, we're going to ask that after the referendum as well. We want to know whether the losers still have a positive view of that afterwards, if they didn't get what they wanted. In terms of whether both sides of the debate get a fair chance, we're getting 56% saying yes, absolutely. Lower levels of support for the Electoral Commission, but that's because most people neither agree nor disagree, and we suspect that's largely a question of visibility of the Electoral Commission. However, if that's the good news, we asked people whether they think that campaign sides have been telling the whole truth. A majority say no. We asked if it's possible for the campaigns to actually truly know the consequences of independence, and 70% say no, it's not even possible. And specifically on the issue of Europe, we get 60% of people saying, you know what, I don't think anyone really knows whether we're going to get in or not. So then we asked about political knowledge. We know from previous referendum surveys that we get wildly differing responses to knowledge questions from yes and no voters. We asked a number of deliberately true and deliberately false questions. So these are, we said, have you read the white paper? The white paper contains many proposals for an independent Scotland. Which of the following is the yes side advocating in the white paper? So the answers are in bold are correct. And we get better answers when we're asking about issues that have consistently been in the news. We're getting 46% of people accurately saying yes, an independent Scotland and white people, they want to use the pound, they want to keep the Queen as head of state. We get less certainty with respect to some of the false ones, and the key take-home message from this is the consistently high figures of don't know. We've got a majority for all but 2 questions saying they have absolutely no idea, and that's not just, the numbers are slightly lower, they're just below 50% on headline issues, things that have consistently been in the news, like currency and who the head of state will be. But we've got almost 60% of people not knowing whether the goal is for an independent Scotland to go back to imperial measures and ditch the metric system. So there's some of these questions, that how hard or how easy they are, I'll leave to you to judge. In terms of political knowledge by yes and no voters, so these columns here are the proportion of the people who are going to vote no and the people who intend to vote yes. So we see that there's 2 messages here on this slide. One is that yes voters consistently get the answers right more often than no voters, and that the true statements are eliciting higher portions of correct responses than the false statements, and we would expect that to be the case because the media is focusing on things that people are actually proposing and not paying any attention to things that no one is advocating. So in terms of risk, we're interested in 3 different things. We're interested in general risk aversion and what the relationship is between general risk aversion and vote intention in the referendum. We're interested in people's visions of the future, so what would independent Scotland look like, what might happen if Scotland stayed in the Union, and are people doing anything to mitigate what they might see as the risk of independence? We have reference to the capital flight, so we asked about those things. So in terms of general risk aversion, we see there is a relationship. No voters are consistently, generally more risk averse than our yes voters. Findings here are consistent with previous risk and constitutional change survey that was conducted by David Bell under his DBS Fellowship. Then we turn to what people think is going to happen if Scotland becomes independent. So the total likely includes all the proportion of people who think it is very likely or likely that something will happen, and then we have the division between the yes and the no voters. So we have majorities who believe that if Scotland becomes independent, the UK government will move nuclear weapons out of Scotland. A majority believe there will be a defence cooperation. A majority believe Scots will still retain access to and contribute to the services of the BBC. But the interesting things on this slide, I think, are when you look at the different responses between the yes and the no voters. 65% of yes voters think absolutely the UK government will let Scotland keep the pound. 14% of no voters think that's the case. 60% of yes voters think, oh, absolutely, you'll get into Europe and the same conditions of membership as the UK currently has. But only just over 10% of no voters think that. But when it comes to border controls, the no voters say, oh, absolutely, there's going to be border controls, or 40% of them do. And only 14% of yes voters think the same. So you get the sense that yes voters and no voters are perceiving risks or the presence or absence of risk in different corners. And that is fleshed out a little bit if we look at what happens if Scotland stays in the UK. So I think the interesting things, if we're looking at the total likely column, almost a majority believe that spending cuts are inevitable for a Scottish Parliament if Scotland remains within the UK. We also get almost 40% thinking that the UK is going to pull itself out of Europe, or they think the Tories are going to lead the next election. But again, if we look at the differences between what the yes voters are saying and what the no voters are saying, you see wildly different expectations about what might happen if Scotland stays within the UK. So yes voters, they're going to cut our spending, and you know what, they're also going to cut our powers. 42%, 43% saying Scottish Parliament's powers are going to be cut, which no one has ever advocated. But no voters less convinced spending cuts are inevitable, less convinced that the powers are going to be reduced. Differing perceptions of whether the UK is going to pull itself out of Europe. So